Welcome back. In a moment, we'll examine the lucrative business of being happy. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo says presidential elections cannot be held this year due to a lack of funds. The cost of the vote is thought to be around $1.8 billion, and the delay is likely to raise tensions between the government and the opposition. The current president, Joseph Kabila's mandate ran out in 2016. A wildfire on the outskirts of the New Zealand town of Christchurch has forced hundreds of people to evacuate their homes. A state of emergency has been declared, and military helicopters have been deployed to the region. The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Germany at a G20 meeting of foreign ministers. It's his first trip abroad since being confirmed in the role. He's expected to meet his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, at a time when US-Russian relations are under renewed scrutiny. Now, in the first part of our programme, we looked at depression, but this show isn't all about doom and gloom. Now we're going to discuss the business of happiness. There are millions of books, podcasts, email, newsletters, apps, games, vlogs, and whatever else you can think of, helping us to be happy.
What's up, guys? It's Lauren. It's 2017. I'm a little bit late, but it's 2017, and I decided that this year I'm going to make as positive and as happy as possible. So I wanted to share my little tips on being happy and just overall making your life more positive and just feeling better about life.
Well, Lauren Gray is one of many vloggers who talk about positivity and happiness. She's got nearly 800,000 subscribers, and that video has been watched nearly 200,000 times. Well, over the past 4 years, the number of books sold with happy or happiness in the title has risen dramatically. At one of the UK's largest publishers, Penguin Random House, nearly 1.5 million titles were sold last year, compared with just over 300,000 in 2013. While not all those books are self-help, it does appear to show something of a trend. Well, to discuss all this a bit more, Professor Paul Freiters, who's Project Director of World Wellbeing Panel at the London School of Economics, is still with us. He's joined here in the studio by the author Beau Bridgeland, who's just released a book called Day-to-Day Happiness. And on Skype, we have the author Steve Salerno, who's written a book called Sham, and How the Self-Help Movement Made America Help Less. Steve, we'll come to you in just a minute, but let's put the case for happiness and self-help first from Beau. How did you get into this subject of the rules or the help one might need to be happy?
So I suffered heavily from depression and anxiety myself several years ago when I was at university, and I hated every moment of it and just wanted to get better. And after a very long battle and a lot of hard work, and looking at a lot of different resources, I then sort of was able to finally sort of overcome it. And it still comes back in little waves every now and then in different ways. But, you know, nowadays I sort of feel more on top of it. And I do think that, you know, sort of happiness and self-help, and it really is important. I think there are a lot of people out there struggling, and I feel like, you know, everyone needs a bit of help, and it's so hard to talk about. And as you said
is
earlier,
that the crux of this, really? Because, I mean, there is help out there, isn't there? I mean, you had a doctor, you had specialists you could talk to, but you actually fixed it yourself in the end, did you?
It was a number of different things. I think that each person is unique and has different needs in terms of what they need to get better. So for some people it's medication, for some people they just need a different perspective on life, some people need cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that, or a combination of these things. And for me, it was a bit of all of those. But I do kind of feel like the self-help and my own work looking into it was the sort of most important thing, and kind of getting out there and really just trying to kind of tackle it myself and find out what was going on in my life and what I needed to do to kind of become myself again.
And now, in the spirit of trying to help other people and make a few quid on the side, you've put it down in a book. So that's fair enough. We'll come back to that in a minute. Steve's also written a book. Steve Salerno, you're concerned, aren't you, that there's an awful lot of hokum, a lot of snake oil salesmen out there?
Yeah, you know, there's no regulation in self-help. Basically, anybody can start typing away, produce a book. It's a hot field. And the interesting thing about self-help is that studies have shown that the same people are buying basically the same book over and over and over again, So that leads me to question, as I did in my book, whether or not this stuff is effective. And my concern about happiness in particular is I don't think that it's such a good idea to encourage people to be taking the pulse of their happiness on a daily basis, because, human nature being what it is, we're going to find things we don't like, and I'm not sure that that's helpful in the end.
Yeah, I mean, human life is a bit of a sine wave. You're allowed to have some ups and downs, aren't you?
Yeah, but my point is that I think that true happiness, to me, I'm not Dr. Martin Seligman, who, of course, who has done one of the major studies on these things, but true happiness often resides in the acknowledgement that there are going to be periods in your life when you have to be willing to tolerate unhappiness in order to build the kind of stability that you can later on have, that really, to me, is the foundation of happiness, which is more like peace of mind and contentment. I don't think that I don't think the mother raising, who has 3 kids who have intestinal flu is very happy in that moment, but she still needs to weather the course and tend to them.
So, Paul Freitas, this ability to moderate our mood is a skill we learn through life, is it, rather than just a switch you turn on or off?
Definitely. Definitely. It is a skill that people can acquire later in life. Some people learn it very early in life. And some people never acquire it, right? They never acquire it
as well.
They can lose it as well. But it is a skill. It is something that, that we know that adults who've never practiced it in their lives can sort of generate what I would call a second voice inside themselves, watching themselves think and watching themselves reacting to their basic thoughts. Going into extremely positive and negative emotions. And the effective trick is to let the positive emotions go, right? Encourage them, let yourself be happy, and as it were, push back against the negative emotions and counter it with either positive images or more serene images to some degree, right? Which is emotional regulation, really.
So is there an education argument to this, Bo, that if you'd had the right kind of teaching before you went to university, do you think you would have been a happier person while at university?
Yes, I do actually, because it was I realised very late in my depression that I had had low self-esteem all my life, and that was one of the contributing factors to my depression and anxiety. And I don't blame anyone. I don't blame my parents for not teaching me those kinds of things. But I do feel that, yeah, if I maybe did have a different perspective and I had been told certain things at a young age, that I do have value and that I'm unique and special in my own way, not in a too kind of, that kind of way, but there are things that I kind of feel like that maybe could have given me a bit of an edge. I think university still would have been difficult, but I think I could have coped.
You've had a
lot
better toolkit, maybe. To
yeah,
cope with it
yeah,
all.
exactly.
But Steve, when we go into some of the other things you see in the happiness market, and this does, forgive me being a skeptic, slightly cranky, like special crystals. As long as I buy plenty of them and stare at them, or I have a bath in special mud, are we really going into the world of make-believe here? Does any of this stuff work?
I don't know. I'm sure there are some programs that work. You mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy earlier. That for people who are clinically depressed, obviously they need to try to moderate their behavior. But my concern is that what we also do is if we talk relentlessly about happiness, are you happy? Am I happy? Am I happy? You encourage a kind of self-focused behavior that to me, it leads to selfishness and a tendency to not want to do the unpleasant things in life that we have to do, not only for the benefit of others, but for our own benefit in the long term.
Right, so you shouldn't, the danger is all this school of thought encourages selfishness perhaps, or a self-centeredness that ultimately is unhealthy.
Well, I mean, if you're in a marriage, and marriages are going to have ups and downs, there's going to have periods where things aren't going the way you want them to, where you're not particularly happy. If I am practicing, let's say, day-to-day happiness, and I'm taking that pulse, I'm taking that measurement on such a regular basis, isn't there going to be a tendency for me to make reckless decisions and to decide you're not as happy as maybe you ought to be, and do something that, whereas in the old days you'd say, well, I'm just going to suck it up and stay the course and we'll see what happens.
It's about identifying the personality type you are, I suppose, because you also see people, or you meet people in life or something, who are too helpful to others, and they put themselves last in the list, and then they suffer as a consequence there.
Yeah.
So where should we get the education for that, being that self-aware, what sort of person you are?
Well, if I can sort of respond first to the first comment made, which was that this incessive navel gazing on our own happiness, as if it's the weight that you look at in the morning, you become obsessive as to whether I'm happy. I would agree that that's not a healthy mindset.
Right.
But of course, there's a whole market out there of self-help book and other help books and other help organizations. So the main organization that I know here in England is called Action for Happiness, which is kind of a secular movement. And their main message is not, think about your own happiness all the time, but how can you make other people happy? And so it has this philanthropic aspect to it. And in making other people happy, it is surprising how well we help our own happiness. We care for ourselves by caring for other people many times. Now, one can, as it were, intrusively care for other people, right? Sort of as a botherer who sort of impinges on other people's lives. But it doesn't have to be that way, right?
No.
We can care for other people in all kinds of ways by providing them options or mainly just handing out food.
And that's, yeah, exactly. And that's a fundamental teaching of all sorts of ways of life, isn't it? Sort of decent behavior, share things at school, religions teach you to be nice to others. I mean, do you identify with that? Do you think that's right?
I do. And it's about finding the moderation of it all. Because as you said, that sort of selflessness. And I had no idea how to say no to people a few years ago.
Right.
I would just jump in and say yes and feel like I had to help them. And because I had low self-esteem, I felt like they were above me and that it was sort of my obligation to help them, even though actually I had every right to say no.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just finding that balance of everything. It's not, one thing is that people will sort of say the phrase like, oh, be a bit selfish. And it's kind of like, no, it's not. There's a difference between being selfish and between just kind of putting yourself first every once in a while, So it's just about sort of valuing yourself, putting yourself first more often, but not all the time, because all the time would be selfish.
Balance in everything is the trick, isn't it, I guess?
I think so.
Bo, Paul, and Scott, thank you all very much indeed. Now let's end with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. And today, it's athletes at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics are going to receive medals that are more environmentally friendly than most. Citizens of the Japanese capital are being asked to donate old mobile phones and small devices from which the government will source the gold, silver and bronze needed for the medals. It's a cost-cutting measure for an event which already has run well over budget, but also a way for Japanese citizens can be more involved in the occasion. The Olympic Committee hopes to collect enough of the medals to make all 5,000 Olympic and Paralympic medals. And that's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.